I'm really thrilled to introduce you to Armine Yalnizyan over here. Armine is one of Canada's leading progressive economists and a senior economist with the Canadian
Canada.
Alternatives. And it's a real coup that we got Armine this year. We've been trying for a few years, and it's finally happened, so we're really thrilled. She has written about trends in labor markets, income inequality, and public finance for over 20 years. Over the years, she has served on numerous advisory groups to ministers at the federal and provincial levels, taught economics at York University, and worked with international and domestic NGOs. In the early 1990s, she chaired the Employment and Economy Committee of NAC, the National Action Committee on the Status of Women, just as budgets and social policies were being transformed by recession and free trade agreements. In 1998, after a decade as program director of the Social Planning Council of Toronto, she published a groundbreaking report on income inequality called The Growing Gap. In 2005, she produced a widely referenced budgetary analysis of how the Government of Canada followed through on its commitments to gender equality made in Beijing in 1995, resulting in a federal promise to embed gendered analysis in its budgetary process. In 2007, the report The Rich and the Rest of Us documented how even strong economic growth was not enough to reduce rising inequalities. A frequent media commentator, her analysis of the ongoing impacts of the recession adds zest to important debates of our time, such as the role of government. Armine is a regular contributor to the Globe and Mail's online feature, Economy Lab, and serves on the boards of the Canadian Association for Business Economics, the Canadian Institute of Population and Public Health, and the Public Interest Advocacy Centre. Armine.
Hey, everybody. Hey, rabble-rousers out there in Rabble Land. It's great to be with you tonight to celebrate your work of human development, which is about reducing material inequality and reducing democratic inequalities around the world. In fact, it's about pursuing the abundant life, which we've been doing for a fair 1,000 or 2 years. And by the abundant life, I'm not referring to lots of stuff, but the stuff of life. It's a pleasure being with you at this time to celebrate this moment in Canada, federal election time, an election where actually Canadians seem to be waking up. Hello, hello, Rabble-land and all the rest of Canadians that are paying attention to what politics is all about. And it's, And it's a pleasure to be celebrating with you this time on the planet. A time of great unrest, a time of great longing for something better, a time of clear transition. We are more interdependent and more connected with one another than we've ever been before, and it seems like almost nothing can tip us over into a new moment. And it's a very exciting time to be thinking about what we can be doing to advance human development together. And it is also a time of echo. A time of transition and a time of echoing. I like to think of this as the 100-year itch. Just a few days ago, we celebrated the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day. And International Women's Day first happened on March the 19th, 2011, and it emerged in the midst of times very similar to what we're experiencing now. Very turbulent times, insecure times, volatile and tremendously tenuous economic circumstances, economic conditions that were about globalization, robber barons, great inequalities, grinding poverty, people moving from country to city in search of opportunity, often being greeted by exploitation and very hard times. But people not being content with the status quo. It just wasn't enough. And incremental change wasn't enough. So 100 years ago, people all over the world, especially women, the women that drive the work of Inter Pares, started thinking about how do we make a better world for everybody, where everybody is heard and treated inter pares, as equals. By 1917, the International Women's Day celebrations in Russia turned into the Russian Revolution. As Margaret Thatcher said, if you want to get something done, ask women to do it. Okay, that isn't what she meant, but you know what I mean. Actually, when you think about it, like the culottes rouges are the people that actually started the French Revolution a couple of centuries before that. It was the women that said, basically, we need the égalité part of fraternité, liberté, égalité was brought to you courtesy of the culottes rouges, who never did get a bit of a voice in their democratic process. But truly, women know how to rock the vote and rock the boat. But let's fast forward now to the moment that we're in. And the moment we're in is rife with material inequality, both between North and South, but increasingly in our own nations, in our own regions, in our own provinces, sometimes between our own generations in the same family. Something's going on, and the something that's going on is proof that the 30-year social experiment we've been living has failed. The social experiment I'm referring to is the Washington Consensus. Somewhere in the early 1980s, actually I think it was 1980, all the major Bretton Woods institutions, the ones that were cobbled in the wake of the Great Depression, agreed that the primary purpose of human endeavor should be to grow the economy. And in its wake, good things would come. It's the trickle-down theory. Give money to the people that make money. They shall invest it. That will create jobs, and everybody will be better off. But 30 years into this grand plan, the fix is in. The game is rigged, and trickle-down would work if it weren't for the sponges at the top. So we get to 2007 when I was asked to reprise the work I did in the mid-1990s, and I got to tell you, when I was first asked to reprise that study on growing income inequality in Canada, I was pretty sure that inequality would have contracted. Because for all the data that we've got, basically inequality always rose. For the data we had available, inequality grew when they were in the wake of a recession. People lose their jobs, they lose hours of work, there's downward pressure on wages. It takes a long time for things to pick up again until the labor market tightens. So inequality widens during a recession or in its aftermath, but it closes when there's jobs, right? Well, so what happened between 1997 and 2007 was Canada became the job juggernaut of the advanced industrial nations. We created 2 million jobs. We've got a fraction of the population of the other G7 nations, but we created more jobs than anybody else in the G7. So you would think that inequality would have shrunk. Well, indeed, the poor did get less poor because when there's work, people work. So the bottom came up, but the top exploded. So for the first time in our history, we had growing inequality not because the poor were losing ground, but because the rich were off to the races. So for the first 20 years of data that I looked at, it looked like the rich, the poor, and the middle kind of moved in tandem. After taxes, which include government transfers, things were kind of kept pretty much packed. People moved in tandem, but the last 10 years have shown us that the rich have gained most of the gains from economic growth. In fact, the top 1% took 1/3 of all the income gains of economic growth in the past decade. Now, some people will say, well, the rich always get richer. Nothing new. In fact, that decade, 1997 to 2007, where the richest 1% of Canadians took 1/3 of all the income gains from growth, compares to a similar period of economic growth in the 1960s, where the richest 1% only took 8% of the growth. This is not normal what's going on. We have never seen anything like this before. You'd have to go back to the 1920s to see the share of incomes that go to the top 1% in Canada. I'm not talking about the United States. I'm not talking about how good we are compared to other nations. I'm saying in respect of our own history, we are in uncharted territory as we speak. But then, of course, the economic crisis came along. So I did this work that takes us up to 2007, and then the economic crisis hits in 2008. Okay, The economic crisis hits in 2008, and the mantra, less government, more market, is turned upside down. Suddenly, the market is desperate for help from the government. And we understand that what has driven the crisis is greed, lack of regulation, massive risk shifts, not enough backstops for all the crazy things that's going on. Those were the culprits that were fingered for the economic crisis, but we didn't learn from those insights. We didn't fix the problems they implied. Instead, we accepted only that the role for government was to get us back to business as usual and then step out of the way as usual. Well, in 2009, we did a postmortem on how come we didn't get something better out of this deal, where you could see transparently the failures of the market system. You could see what was happening to growing inequality. The fact is that we have all the money in the world to do anything we want, but we can't seem to find the money to keep open the pools and the rinks that my parents' generation built with a fraction of the resources. What's going on? It's not like we don't have money. How come we can't find the money to do the things to even maintain what my parents' generation built? Forget about expanding it for the next generation. So one of the things that we were doing in 2009 was celebrating anniversaries here, there, and everywhere. And I was asked to speak about the Regina Manifesto in Saskatchewan in our sister office. In fact, I was asked to come and help them fundraise, the Saskatchewan CCPA office. And I said to the fellow that invited me, I said, God, I hope you're not going to ask me to talk about the Regina Manifesto because I've never read it. And in fact, he said, well, that's what we're celebrating, actually, is the anniversary of the Regina Manifesto, which forced me to read the Regina Manifesto. And, I had to roll my eyes when I read the opening line, and it was like, we aim to, replace the capitalist system, blah-de-blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, how can you get into this, right? And this is after the crisis. You would think that we would be talking about capitalism, but we weren't. We weren't talking about capitalism. But everything else that comes in the Regina Manifesto, and ladies and gentlemen, may I encourage you to read the Regina Manifesto. 3,000 slender words. It's not a long document. It is jaw-dropping in its elegance. And it reads, other than that opening line about we're going to replace capitalism, it reads as if it was written last month. It's a stunning indictment of where the progressive movement is today, because we cannot seem to translate this widespread understanding, this resonant understanding in the population into a manifesto of change. Or can we? But I'm going to get to that in a minute. So we've got a material inequality in terms of the income gap that used to be driven by recessions that is now driven by growth. Oh, God, help us. This is like another unsustainable phenomenon, just as unsustainable as climate change. If inequality grows in good times and bad, this is not a sustainable system. People will opt out if all you're asking them to do is get better educated and work harder, and they don't get any gain from any of it. People will opt out somehow if, in fact, they can't get into the middle class. Forget about becoming a millionaire. So the next phase of material inequality is some of the stuff that Nadia and Inter Pares is working with. Just the fact that you can't make ends meet in more and more communities. The fact that we've got 500 boil water advisories in this country. The fact that our schools are fundraising and we have schools that are essentially private schools in the middle of a public school system because some parents can fundraise more effectively than others. And schools were supposed to be the great levelers, yes? That's what we were supposed to be doing. And healthcare now, where there's the people that have money want care quick. Get out of my way. I will help myself to the system and I will relieve the public system. We're topsy-turvy now. We've got all the money in the world to fix the problems that are challenging us, and yet we keep running up against this wall of there's no money. Getting to the middle now takes two. We have had a social revolution where, in fact, women act more like men. Young women of today outperforming young men in terms of getting better education. Young women of today working exactly the same as the young men of this generation. Young women of today and young men of today forming families much more late in life, having fewer children. Basically, they are living to work, not working to live. And yet, pedaling that much faster, investing in education so that they can get a crack at the middle class, and finding that the middle class has been stagnant for 30 long years. You got more people working in a household in the middle of the income spectrum. They're putting in more hours, they're better educated, and there is no income improvement in 30 years. So we've now run out, we've played the woman card, we've played the education card. What's the next generation going to do? What are we offering the next generation in terms of a middle class? So you see, we celebrate the middle class growing elsewhere. We're very happy that China and India, Brazil and Russia are growing their purchasing power and therefore driving the global supply chain. But for people that want to hang on to their good wages, their benefits and their pensions here, that is considered unsustainable. People that are poor should just get better educated and work harder to do better. And people that are rich, well, hey, we all want to be them, so why deny them? We're not going to get anywhere very fast this way. And in fact, I want to say to you that this type of collective false consciousness, where we all view ourselves to be middle class, don't we? The rich think they're middle class, the poor think they're middle class, the middle class thinks they're middle class, and yet the middle class isn't going anywhere, and we don't actually want to support the middle class. In fact, all we do is we peddle and sell this idea of mobility. So you want to be a millionaire? You too can be a millionaire. Is all the stuff in the papers. Put your money in a tax-free savings account. Put $5,000 a year aside for the rest of your life, and you can have $5 million when you retire. In fact, we now have more millionaires than we've ever had before. In fact, last week, BMO Private Banking told us that 94% of millionaires are self-made men. Yeah, they're self-made men, but they're self-made people. They didn't inherit it, honest. They self-report that only 6% of them self-reported as having inherited their wealth. The rest of them, of course, worked hard for the money. I'm hearing Donna Summers. But I actually have to wonder whether it was their effort that put them there, because in fact we value those people far more than we used to value them in the past. We always had celebrities, we always had bosses, we always had entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. We always had the people with the royal jelly, right? They were different than us. They were better, they were smarter, they were brighter, they were shinier. But they didn't make as much money as they do today. They weren't worth that much more than the average worker. The average CEO today makes 155 times the average worker in Canada. Now, only 8 years ago, they made 100 times more than the average worker. So you have to wonder at what point are they really worth that much more suddenly? This dream of mobility, in fact, is fading, though we are still being peddled this false consciousness. Why? Because the increasing concentration of income, wealth, and power actually slows mobility down. It actually makes it harder to get ahead. And that goes to the democratic inequality that we are talking about. What do I mean by a democratic inequality? When you have money, you can influence things. The more money you have, the more influence you have. People with money would like to pay less taxes. The tax cut agenda did not come out of thin air. It came out of a huge amount of influence, basically saying that corporations should pay less taxes because they create jobs, and rich people should pay less taxes because they are investors. And they have seen a bonanza in tax cuts, including corporate and personal tax cuts. Since 2000, the Paul Martin government, or the Jean Chrétien Paul Martin government, put together a package of tax cuts that were the biggest reductions in taxes ever seen in our history, eclipsing what happened in the post-war demobilization period of $100 billion over 5 years. It actually got bigger than that, but I won't get into why. 2006, so that was between 2000 and 2005, we gave back, or depending on how you look at it, the federal public purse lost $100 billion. And you can do a lot for everybody with $100 billion. But that wasn't enough. 2006 comes in, and Prime Minister Stephen Harper introduces within the first 22 months of his office $220 billion. $220 billion in tax cuts. So when you think about all the resources that we have collectively, that we fail to use collectively because we collectively believe that we are going to be better off by somehow government giving us our money back, what has happened is that the agenda has been shifted, and the rise of the right is not the rise of the right, actually. The movement is not about right or left. The movement is about me instead of us, and how the best thing governments can do for me is get out of my way. And in fact, the real triumph of this agenda is the disconnect between what our taxes, how much we pay in taxes, and what our taxes buy. Now, it's very easy to tell you how much you're getting back in your taxes. It is very challenging for a politician to tell you, and you're getting this for your taxes. This is the services you're getting. And it is an extremely ugly piece of economic work to say what's the incidence of benefits from services. Trust me, we've tried this a lot. But a very brave colleague of mine, Hugh Mackenzie, along with a fellow named Richard Shillington, who's a statistician, did a crack at it. And the result is a document called Canada's Quiet Bargain. It was released not long ago. You can find it on the CCPA site. Here's the punchline. In the halfway point of all households in Canada, for the median household, they get the equivalent of 50% of their disposable income in values of services. So it's like adding 50% to your paycheck. That benefit, you get more than you pay for services, goes right up to the 80th percentile. So 80% of Canadians get more out of their taxes than they pay in taxes. We never think of it that way, do we?
On n'y pense jamais de cette façon-là, mais c'est un bon marché, c'est une bonne affaire, c'est une affaire de... Alors, il nous faudrait établir les fondations de croissance économique.
Who benefits from the tax cuts exactly? Well, not 38% of women. 38% of women already don't pay taxes. Their taxable income is too low. That doesn't make them poor. It just means that when you bundle up all the deductions, they already don't pay taxes. So when we talk about helping the poor by raising the income threshold, which a lot of us will do in this room, you want to help the poor shouldn't pay taxes, should they? So we'll raise the income threshold. That'd be good for the poor, wouldn't it? Well, actually, raising the income threshold doesn't reach most of the poor. What it reaches, who it reaches, are taxpayers. The poor, by and large, do not pay taxes. Raising the income threshold does nothing for them. But I'll tell you what does do something for the poor: the services that those taxes buy. They, in fact, disproportionately benefit from those services. So we're being conned into saying that the best thing we can do is not tax poor people. We should be talking about what actually improves all of our lives: rich, poor, and middle class. How do we raise our voices in this way? Well, in fact, our voice has been taken away in very rapid measures since 2006. Inter Pares is working to show what governments could and should be in countries around the world, why transparency is important, and how long it takes to actually get towards greater democratic equality. Within a few swift months, we lost the status of women and the court challenges program. And having shut down voice, we are now shutting down information. Because irony of ironies, on May the 2nd, when we go to the election booth, that's the day that Statistics Canada will start mailing out census forms. And we have been told that, in fact, we don't have to answer the census. But, my friends, if we don't answer the census long form, and by the way, their great new idea, which is to send it out to 1 in 3 households instead of 1 in 5 households as it was before. Not everybody answers the long form census. That was a soft we did in the 1970s. It actually increases now the chances, if they do this again, it increases the chances. So in the old system, when it came out to 1 every 5 households, you had a chance of filling it out, statistically speaking, a probability of filling it out maybe twice, maybe 3 times in your life. It's about an hour job, and it's like an act of citizenship. It actually reflects your interests. Now it's once every 4 or 5 times in your life. And you don't have to answer the questions, which means your government can't see you, particularly if you're vulnerable, particularly if you live in a small rural community, particularly if you're a new immigrant or an Aboriginal or a member of a reserve or an Inuit community, a member of a disabled group. Not seen, not heard. That's the way to do it, isn't it? So what Inter-Pares is building elsewhere, we are taking apart here. Lawrence Martin wrote an amazing piece the other day. It's actually available on iPolitics. And I can't remember the title of it, but the subtitle is A Democracy of One. And it is about the democratic record of Stephen Harper. And read it and weep, read it and vote. Read it and talk to the people that think that Stephen Harper is the best economic manager, because it isn't just about economics. Democracy cannot exist going down the path that we are going. In fact, there has been a flurry of description about this. Joseph Stiglitz, who was the chief economist of the World Bank, wrote a piece in this month's Vanity Fair called Of the 1%, For the 1%, By the 1%. And it's written as a cautionary tale for the Americans, but in fact we are perilously close to it here in Canada. I've written a blog about it on the Progressive Economics Forum website. Back in January, we had Chrystia Friedland, who is the chief correspondent for Reuters, no lefty here, with the cover feature of the Atlantic Monthly called The Rise of the Global Elite. Everywhere in the Western world, we are talking about the rise of a plutocracy. What's going on? What happened to our dream of a vibrant and growing middle class? What happened to our dream of a vibrant and effective democracy? Well, Inter-Pares is working apparently from nothing to something. Well, there's never nothing, eh? You always start with something. And you can't kill democracy in this country either. In fact, we've seen a remarkable surge in democratic spirit in just the last week. And it makes me think about what happened 100 years ago. See, the Regina Manifesto came out in 1933, but it built on the women's movement. It built on the progressives in the prairies. It built on the farmers, the trade unionists, the peaceniks, all these groups that came together that were fed up with the status quo in the teens and in the 20s. It took them 20 years to get going. I don't think it's going to take us that long to get going this time around. I don't think we're there yet. But it took them 3 years to develop their manifesto. We know what needs to be done. We know where we need to go. And I don't care what color the tide is, what seems to be happening and what we must encourage in Canada as well as elsewhere is this desire to keep our politicians honest, to address the big problems that we're facing, problems like climate change, problems like growing income inequality, problems like an aging demographic, and a shifting of the global geopolitics of our tiny little planet. We know what we need to do. It is still the search for the abundant life, and together we can scratch that 100-year itch. Thank you.